When your BFF is telling you an interesting story about what happened to them, what do? Do you sit there stone-faced until it's over? Probably not. You might raise your eyebrows, nod as you listen, or ask questions. You might even express shock and awe over some gossipy news your BFF is sharing, right? Well, the bottom line is that you're engaging with the person speaking to you, and you're actively responding to their story by expressing your thoughts about it. You're an active listener. In this podcast, we're going to discuss active reading, which is a lot like active listening. It's all about engaging with the information coming at you and responding to it naturally. Being an active reader means that you think critically about what you're reading while you're reading it. It helps to make notes about things that catch your attention, write down questions that come to mind, or to look up words that you don't know. You're not ready to be an active reader until you have pen in hand and paper nearby, especially when you're reading a long novel. It's easy to forget details and key passages unless you make notes along the way. Okay, so that brings us to the question, what do I make notes about? Whenever you're reading, you're actually looking for something. You're looking for clues that reveal what the author is trying to say through the story, which is the author's purpose. In other words, you're analyzing. Do you think that sudden rainstorm was just a rainstorm? Think again. It could be a symbol for something. Does that minor character's random monologue just seem to come out of nowhere? Be careful. That minor character might really be articulating something very important about the story. You want to keep in mind what the big picture is. What's the story about? What is the author trying to say through the story? Or how does the story handle its subject matter? All good questions to ask yourself while you're reading. Often we talk about interpreting literature. This means that different people will place emphasis on different aspects and will come to different conclusions about what the author means. It's your opinion, so bear in mind that a book, a play, a poem doesn't have to have only one meaning. It can have slightly different meanings to different people, and it may not even have a clear-cut message or lesson at all. Unlike fairy tales and fables, where there is a clear moral to the story, most authors prefer to tackle complex questions that can have many answers. Perhaps an author is addressing an immediate problem, but is also saying something about a universal experience. Contemporary works often raise moral or ethical questions, but make no pretense of providing any answers. From these we learn more indirectly, and their value lies in pointing out important problems and inducing us to seek solutions. It's good to know a little something about the author before you read their work, and it's easy to find background information by looking the author up in an online encyclopedia. Was he a civil rights activist? Was she a staunch feminist or a reclusive spinster? An author may write fiction, but their work is most likely going to reflect subjects and issues that they felt strongly about. Perhaps the author liked to set all of his stories in a small Mississippi town, as William Faulkner did. It's nice to know this before you read one of his books because it tells you that he likes to write about Southern culture and Southern characters, and that he drew from his own experiences of living in Mississippi. But be careful not to make hasty connections between an author's biography and what you find in his or her fiction. An author isn't necessarily writing about himself, even if the story occasionally resembles their life. By now you're probably thinking, okay, great. Analysis, meaning, that's all good, but how do I actually do it? There are 3 types of readers. One is the type of reader who reads a work once straight through without making any notes and without stopping to think about what the author is actually saying. This kind of reader doesn't take time to look beyond the surface level of the story. When this type of reader gets done with a book, the paper probably looks like this. A second type of reader reads a work and analyzes every single word. They latch onto each detail, committing them to memory. They think that everything is a vital clue for unlocking the author's meaning, and by the time they finish the work, they are so caught up in the details that they have missed the author's point altogether. They can't see the forest for the trees, and their paper would probably look like this. Then there's a third type of reader. This reader reads a work twice. The first time they read it quickly, focusing on the plot and the characters, and just generally enjoying the story. The second time they read, they already know what the book is about and how it ends, and they're free to absorb the hidden clues that enhance the book's message. The second time, they can better appreciate the author's style, something they may not have noticed their first time through. And their paper would probably look like this. Reading a work twice is like watching a movie twice. Some movies have really complicated plots and lots of characters. The first time you watch the movie, you just try to keep up with who's who and what's what. But the second time you watch it, now you know how it ends and who the bad guy is, and you're more likely to look at how the movie is made, how it uses camera angles, special effects, music, and lighting. These are the nonverbal elements of a movie that help tell the story. So even though books are very different from movies, you actually will focus on the different elements depending on how familiar you are with the story. When you're assigned to read a short story or a group of poems, it's fairly easy to read it twice. But what if you've been assigned to read War and Peace? It's not likely that you'll have time to read it twice. So what do? Never fear. Here are some techniques that you can apply to help you be an active reader, no matter how long a book is. After you've read the book once, go back and reread the first and the last chapters. Pay close attention to how the author opens up the book and draws the reader in. Then, look at how the author brings the story to a close. Is it a happy ending? Sad? Bittersweet? The beginning and the end of a book will provide you with many clues about the author's style and tone toward the subject matter. Read carefully, not quickly. Don't try to rush through a book just because it's long. If you do, you will likely miss important details. Make notes as you go along to help you remember what happens. Dog-ear or put sticky flags on sections that seem important so that you can go back and reread them later. Make a cheat sheet for yourself about characters and plots. This is especially helpful if you're reading a book with several characters and many subplots. Write down a list of major plot points as you see them develop. Then when you wonder, did the butler poison the heiress before or after the maid found the chauffeur's body in the freezer? Well, then you'll have a guide for referencing them. Finally, try to gather clues about what the book is really about. Beneath the story, what is the author really trying to get across? Continually look for clues, but don't become so consumed with them that you miss the story. Having an idea about the book's meaning early on will help you make connections between important details as you continue reading. Now that we've learned what it means to be an active reader and how that can help us analyze literature, move on to the next podcast, which is about using literary analysis in the essays we write.